Good morning. I was speaking with my mother yesterday and telling her how nervous I was to be a facilitator for a conversation with Madame Justice L'Heureux-Dubé. And my mother said, "Don't even think about it, Constance." She said, "With Madame Justice Claire L'Heureux-Dubé at your side, nobody will care what you say." So, with that comforting note, c'est avec grand plaisir que j'ai accueilli chaleureusement l'Honourable Claire L'Heureux-Dubé. She has generously agreed to join us today for a conversation about her life and career. En guise d'introduction, j'aimerais mentionner que cet événement est relié au programme de bourse d'intérêt public de common law de l'Université d'Ottawa. We fundraise every year to allow some of our students, and some of you will know that, to pursue public interest work during the summer. And Madame le juge L'Heureux-Dubé a d'ailleurs généreusement donné la somme de $5,000 pour la bourse.
I'm totally broke.
I have asked Madame Justice L'Heureux-Dubé if we could focus our conversation today primarily on topics that directly relate to our students, reflections on the influences of her youth, and the decisions she made about her career path. Researchers know so little about why people opt to move in one direction or are pushed or pulled in another. As young law students, I remember sitting in your seat, and my only thought was there was no job out there for me. It was not a question of which. I was sure there was none. Why do our career paths shape themselves as they do? Are talents and skill the critical elements? How much depends on access to information about the possibilities? How much is based on status and connections? How many decisions are influenced by families, teachers, peers? How much relates to personal ambition and drive? How does the economy set the stage? What role does timing play? Je suis persuadée que cette vie aussi riche en expériences racontée par une personne dont la contribution au droit canadien a été aussi exceptionnelle ne pourra que nous enrichir toutes et tous. Alors, commençons à présent.
Est-ce que je pourrais me permettre juste un moment pour remercier Adam d'abord qui a été... Je n'ai jamais vu une audience comme ça. Je n'en reverrai jamais. Ça... Et remercier Constance qui est très occupée, comme on le sait, puis qui est dans toutes ses recherches, pour avoir facilité cette conversation. Vous êtes ma meilleure audience. Je n'en ai pas d'autres, en fait. Alors, je suis très contente de vous voir et j'adore les jeunes. J'ai des petits-enfants moi-même. Alors, j'espère qu'on pourra développer un thème qui vous intéresse. Alors, Constance, merci et on commence. Ça va?
Ça va. So I thought we should start with two questions about life before law school. Hard to imagine back that far, but qui a eu la plus grande influence dans votre vie?
Je vais vous dire ce que tout le monde dit, et avec moi, c'est très senti, c'est ma mère. Je vais vous raconter une petite histoire à ce sujet-là. Nous étions à la Cour suprême à ce moment-là, 9, comme toujours, et une journaliste un peu agressive m'a demandé si je voulais aller raconter mon histoire à CPAM, quelque chose comme ça, là. Et alors, je lui ai dit non, à moins que tous mes collègues acceptent. J'ai proposé ça dans notre réunion, ils ont tous accepté. Et là, chacun est allé discuter. On avait mis une restriction. Nous ne discuterons pas de nos causes. Vous voulez nous connaître personnellement, c'est ce qu'on va faire. Alors, à la fin, chacun avait son heure et demie, bon, pour que l'audience, parce que c'est télévisé, hein, c'est une des cours suprêmes du monde qui télévise ses audiences complètement. Alors, à la fin, elle m'appelle puis elle dit, Claire, ce qui m'a frappée, tous les juges ont dit que la meilleure influence, la plus grande influence dans leur vie, c'était leur mère. L'importance des femmes est incroyable dans la vie de leurs enfants. Ma mère m'a suivie dans ma carrière. Elle a étudié le droit avec moi. C'est une femme absolument extraordinaire, talentueuse, pianiste de concert, etc. Donc, je lui rends hommage aujourd'hui. C'est elle qui m'a parti là-dedans.
As I began doing the biographical research on Madame le Juge's life, I discovered that she grew up in the town of Rimouski on the Bas Saint-Laurent. I grew up in Winnipeg. I had never heard of Rimouski, and I had no idea what it was like.
Too bad for you.
So I got to go to Rimouski with Claire for almost a week to revisit the city of her youth and meet with many of her longtime friends who are still alive. And so I wanted her to share a little with you. Vous avez passé votre jeunesse à Rimouski. Quelle influence ont eu la vie, le climat, les gens de votre jeunesse?
C'était en 1900. Beaucoup d'influence. D'abord, le fleuve. Moi, j'adore l'eau. Je crois que ça a un peu affaire à mon enfance. On vivait les pieds dans l'eau, sur le bord du Saint-Laurent. Je sentais le varech tous les matins. Il y avait beaucoup de vent. On devait toujours se battre avec le vent. Donc, je suis battue. C'est pas surprenant que je me batte. Je me suis battue toute ma vie. So, it had a great influence. It was bucolic. It was beautiful. It was lots of air, lots of green. We were walking in parks. It's a small town at the time, 3,500 people. So, and now it's about 45 to 50,000. So, everything in your life has an influence. But that, I wanted to be a pilot aboard a ship. I missed my vocation, really. So the water gives you horizons. I couldn't live under the mountains. Too bad for those who live. Probably they have other very good options there. But for me, water and the big horizon. So I've always, in my life, thought bigger than I was, or bigger than the context, maybe because that influenced me that much that I like very much international law, human rights law, all things very big. So I guess you never know, but I'm sure that that has a great influence.
And if you could see Claire when she arrives back in Rimouski, she literally just starts to bounce off the ground with such enjoyment. Of the city of her youth. So it is a big part, I think. And I
return every year, and I see my friends from way back that are my age now. So we go back to our roots, and it's always so much pleasure.
And one cannot go into a restaurant in Rimouski with Claire without seeing half of the people she knows in the restaurant, and the other half she introduces herself. And so it's terribly, very, very obviously, it is the city of your birth, and not your birth, but of your youth, and the city which really has profoundly an impact on your life.
I worked there too as a secretary. Don't forget. So
we'll get to the secretarial part shortly, because thinking of career paths, it all started there. But I wanted just briefly to give you an overview of the history of women lawyers in Quebec, because for many of you this will be new. Quebec is now one of Canada's hotspots for feminist success, but its history is less glorious. It was the last province to extend the vote in 1940 and the last to admit women to law. The first female law graduate in Quebec was Annie MacDonald Langstaff, and she actually obtained first-class honors from McGill in 1914, but the barreau refused her admission, and she had to work as a legal secretary all of her life. And the barreau did not admit women lawyers in Quebec until 1942. That year, the Quebec Chief Justice met with the first group of 4 women lawyers who were called to the bar together. They're all in a row in a photograph. And he expressed the hope that their presence would soften and even sweeten the atmosphere of the courts. When Claire began law school in 1948 at the age of 21, she was one of 2 women in her class. And in 1951, she became the 9th woman to graduate from Laval Law School. In 1952, when she was called to the bar, the number of lawyers practicing in Quebec City, where Claire had studied, stood at 239. 238 were male. And Claire was the only woman to enter private practice in the capital city that year, the second woman ever. And I thought it might be useful to give you some context about the career paths of the first 20 women who graduated from Laval, who were called to the bar between 1946 and 1955, who are really the relevant cohort during Claire's first years out of law school. Some lost their footing right at the outset. One never got beyond first-year law school. Several finished law, but not the bar admission, and one of whom was dogged by unspecified rumors that may have related to her daring sexual relations with male suitors, or her left-wing politics, or both. Others found themselves felled by marriage or pregnancy, temporarily or permanently. For those who wished to practice, the first step was to apply. But here, there was another barrier: lack of confidence and self-censorship. Jeanne d'Arc Lemay, Laval's first female graduate, explained, "There was no other woman out there, so I was scared. Maybe I didn't have the courage to apply." The intrepid ones who knocked on the doors found them slammed in their faces. Annette April was rebuffed at every turn. She explained, "Some told me we don't hire women here. Others said, oh, you'll get married and leave your job." And another one, she said, wanted me to answer the phone like a secretary. I said, "Monsieur, I studied the same thing as you. I did the same time." Occasionally, lawyers blamed it on the clients, apologizing that none of them would ever accept a woman. And most shocking of all, some of the lawyers saw the young women as sexual playthings. Annette April recalled one lawyer who met her request for a job in his firm with the astonishing response, "We have no jobs for you, but I could buy you a fur coat."
They didn't buy me one, unfortunately.
So the risky option was to open on your own. But the only woman in private practice in Quebec City the year that Claire began was Ginette Fournier, an unsung heroine whose name has largely been lost from memory. It's interesting. We celebrate the first women who succeed, but we don't think to celebrate the first women for whom the challenges were too great. And I think they're just as important to the historical record. So what can I tell you about Jeanette? She was described by her classmates as very short, very intelligent, and very funny. She was admitted to the bar 1 year before Madame Justice L'Heureux-Dubé, and she hung out her shingle from 1952 to 1955 in the same building in which her brother practiced. But interestingly, that didn't help. That was no ticket to entry because her brother's firm was not interested in Jeanette. By 1956, only a few short years later, Jeanette moved her office, and the next year she disappeared from the Canadian law list. She seems to have become discouraged, went back to Laval to study social work, and took up that field thereafter. Her footprint in the profession was so gentle and tentative that Madame Justice L'Heureux-Dubé was unaware she had even practiced law in the city. So where did the others end up? Well, 5 of the first 20 were diverted into government employment. Positions as in-house corporate counsel for insurance firms and trust companies offered careers for 2 more, and 2 others benefited from their connections. Louise Galipeau was a member of an old Quebec family that had served as a legal dynasty for generations. And she used those contacts to land a position in the family law firm. Marguerite Choquette used her family's legal dynasty as a pathway to private practice as well. Neither woman stayed the course. Both of them left practice for appointment to the juvenile court at an early stage. So for most of these early 20 women, access to practice was illusory. And when I interviewed Madame Justice Claire L'Heureux-Dubé some months ago, she summed it up by saying, "The bar gave us the right to practice, but the profession did not accept us. There was no place for us, even in the basement." So I want to ask a series of questions now about your career path, Madame Justice L'Heureux-Dubé. And you told me initially that when you began your legal studies at Laval, you never thought you would have a career, a paid career in law. So why go to law school?
To learn the law, well, influence of my mother again. She always said, it's not just. It's not just, looking for justice everywhere. So I was brought up with the idea that justice was so important, I had to learn how to get there. And so I went to law school, but I had before, my father was from his time, he was very happy after a while, but he didn't believe I would succeed. So he said, oh, just take a course in secretariat, you'll learn that. So he brought a typewriter at home, he brought me a method, I learned to type and I learned the method. So it helped, it was very helpful. So when I got to law school, I never thought I would be able to practice. There was no woman practitioner, nowhere I could see, but I was sure I could earn my living by being a good secretary, which I was. So, I guess it left me totally free not to go to courses too often. That's not true. I'm lying here. But I was free to learn about justice and how you reach justice. It was fascinating for me, much more than what I hear some young people here want to earn a degree to earn $100,000. Well, that was not my case. I was pretty sure I wouldn't be able to. And that's pure luck. I had the chance.
So I'm going to see if we can track the career path from its beginnings. And one of those beginnings was your first, I think it was your first effort to secure employment in 1952, the year of your call, when you sent a letter of inquiry to the United Nations International Labor Office in Geneva and asked them for a job. And what happened?
It was very much a shot. That I expected that at the international level they were more open to women. So what happened? She knows better than me now.
It was during an interview between us that you told me that you received a letter with a flat-out rejection. The ILO did not hire women.
Yeah.
And
I was teaching in ILO in Torino a few years ago, so they have moved.
So what do you do with a flat-out rejection? Many of our students are going to get those kinds of letters. They may not say we no longer hire women, But they will say, sorry, we're not going to hire you. What do you do next?
Well, what I did, I spoke to my mother and I said, I don't know how I could get a job as a lawyer. I have no connection at all. My father was a civil servant, not in politics, not in law, nothing. Super bando. So I said, what do I do? My mother said, if I were you, I would put a little note on a newspaper saying cheap labor kind of thing. Part-time job. That was my 4th year at Laval, the bar year. So I didn't have any money. I had paid for my studies by working as a secretary from 10 to 4 because at that time there was no career professors at Laval University. So there were lawyers and judges. They would come from 8 to 10 and 4 to 6. That was my luck because I could work. And so I did like my mother said, it's a good so you'll see you have some answers from, I won't say from whom she said. But anyway, I did, and I got 2 letters. One was Maurice Pollock, the great merchant in Quebec, for part-time job in the accounting department. And the other was from Sam Schwartz, who was one of the 2 Jewish lawyers in Quebec City. Please call me upon receipt of this letter. It will stay there forever. It's right there. And I said, well, I'll answer Pollock before because, you know, I want to be a lawyer and be a secretary in a lawyer's firm. It makes me shy or something. So I called Pollock. They hired me immediately. So I was happy. And I went to this old lady who had drafted it was all in English in the Chronicle because my mother said, "This is the one that will hire you." So she said, Mrs. Berriman said, "But there's another letter. Come and pick it up." So I went, picked it up. That was Sam Schwartzbart again. "Please, I insist, call me upon receipt of this letter." I said, "Oh, he's so nice, I will call him." So I called him. "I want to see you." So I said, "Well, I have a job. Don't worry, I want to see you." So I went. October 1951, I still remember it was, I looked like a small little hat. When I look at the picture, I just don't know why he hired me. So anyway, interview 5 minutes, I take you. But I said, I have an other job. Don't worry, he's my client. We'll fix that. So that was it. So that's how I started as a secretary. He had been in the war, and he was in the judge's advocate office in Ottawa during the war, and he was restarting his practice in Quebec after coming back from the army. So that's why he was looking for a secretary. That's it.
So he hired you as a secretary, and that actually turned out to be a career track for many of the early women law graduates. They couldn't get jobs as lawyers in firms, so they were hired as secretaries, where they labored diligently, brilliantly, undoubtedly, as secretaries for the rest of their careers.
Langstaff started like that.
She did indeed. Yeah. And she was a superb secretary, and she worked for a superb lawyer. Yeah. However, Sam Schwartz, an outsider in the Quebec City legal profession, transferred your position from secretarial to lawyer when you were called to the bar. Why do you think he did that?
Well, he saw I was talented, I guess. Probably. No, probably he would have hired me as a lawyer at the time I applied, but I was not a lawyer yet, so probably he had that in mind. I'll test her, that would be a good thing, and we worked like 22 years or something together. Not 22 because he was on the bar. But there were 2 Jewish lawyers, and being a minority, I suppose a minority attracted him also. And he worked a lot for human rights. And he took the case of Jehovah's Witnesses against Duplessis. Believe you me, at that time, that was something. Had Mr. Duplessis in the box. And it was a lesson for me for my life. Minorities are important. I never realized that before, but I did at the time that they were. So Sam said, you know, you're a Catholic. Maybe you will get some letters saying, you know, menace the mort, whatever. He said, you can leave if you want. It was very elegant on his part. I said, why should I leave? That's fascinating to me. And that has very much educated me in. We didn't call it human rights at that time, but it was really human rights he was working for.
And I think it's important to remember that in that era, and it's not just in Quebec City, it's all across Canada and in the United States as well, there were very severe practices of discrimination. Race, religion, ethnic, gender. The law firms discriminated terribly in terms of who they hired. And it was, in some ways, no accident that Sam Schwartz was Jewish. If you look at the history of Jewish lawyers in Canada, you discover that many of them hired the first black lawyers, the first women lawyers, the first Aboriginal lawyers, the first Asian lawyers. There's a real track record throughout the whole country of Jewish lawyers leading the way and then having people join them. So it was outsiders supporting outsiders, which I think is a theme that as young lawyers going out into the labor market, who will eventually not be young lawyers but be hiring on your own, this is something to remember. And look what it did. If I think actually, Claire, at one point you said to me, I asked, would you have applied to Sam Bard to be a lawyer? Mm-hmm. And you said no.
No.
You said you would not have applied to a private practice firm. And you can't become a judge unless you've been in private practice. And so...
But I was very far from thinking being a judge.
Oh, I know. But in terms of forks in the road, there it was. Without that, nothing else. And so it's fun to think about that little crook in the road. Sam Schwartz makes the job offer, will take you on as a lawyer, and it worked. And you were there for the first 15 years in his law firm in a general law practice, providing legal services primarily for small businesses in Quebec City. Mm-hmm. And then you switched to family law. 15 years after. Can you tell me, did you think in retrospect, well, why did that happen? How does somebody change careers after 15 years in practice? And was that a good move or not?
It was the best move I could have done, but I didn't do it myself. I mean, at that time, in Quebec City, we had no divorce. We had separation as to bed and board only. And then there was only one lawyer, a very eminent lawyer, who looked after that kind of practice, because for lawyers, family law was social work, it wasn't law. It's still the same probably in many, many firms. So that man was appointed to the Court of Appeal, and there was no one to represent them. So I was the only woman practicing law at the time, really practicing very regularly. So they automatically wanted to have a woman to represent them. I always said the men didn't want to give us their money, but they gave us their heart. And the women too. So first I got very poor women. I had a friend who was at the family court, and she saw poor women needed, so she sent them to me. We didn't charge at that time, and in Sam Bard's firm, we didn't work for money. We worked for service. We worked for justice. We took everyone. I was in the poorest district of Quebec. Rue Saint-Joseph, for those who know it, at that time particularly. Alors, les femmes venaient me voir, elles avaient des problèmes, etc. On ne pouvait pas les divorcer parce qu'il n'y avait pas de loi sur le divorce. On les séparait, on faisait des agreements. Alors, puis on disait, ben, tu n'as pas d'argent, mais tu me paieras quand ça te donnera. That was what we did. And finally, from one to the other, that's the way it happens. She's good that she doesn't charge much. So that's how I built up my practice. And at one time, I became so over because Divorce Act came in 1968. Before that, we had to go to Ottawa, but Quebecers. It's a very interesting story for the history of the Divorce Act in Quebec, because it's a bargain made by the church with the government to send it to Ottawa. It's very far, so French Canadians, they won't go there. So they didn't, as a matter of fact. So they waited until the law changed to divorce, and we had a horde of people wanted to make their thing legal and everything. So that's how they came to me from one to the other, and I built a very interesting. I'm so happy. I always say, I'm sure I'm right because I tested it very many times. The best judges are those who have done family law before. They were in the trenches. They know what they're talking about. So for me, it has been a plus in my career when I became a judge, to understand people, to understand the situation, the way that the women in those times are so totally helpless and so on. So for me, it was the best move without me knowing. I just did it to help. But it was the best move I could have ever done.
So again, another lesson. A fork in the road, changing the nature of your practice from general business, corporate, commercial practice into family law. Not something that Madame Justice L'Heureux-Dubé desired, chose, worked actively in favor of, but pushed on her by others. And in my favorite line that I have in the draft biography so far, there's a subtitle that says, "I divorced half of Quebec City." Now, I'm equally interested in career paths not taken by our guest this morning. And so I was amazed to discover the story that she related, that in 1972, several months before the federal election, Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau came to her home to ask her if she would run for the Liberal Party in the federal election that year. And this was unprecedented. It was the first time the federal Liberals had ever run a woman in Quebec. And I wonder if you could, well, most of you will know Pierre Elliott Trudeau by reputation at the very least. And so I wonder if you could describe for us that conversation. What happened, and why did you say what you said?
Well, Pierre Elliott Trudeau was looking, as a matter of fact, for women. He told me, we want more women. I want women to be ministers and everything. I said, oh, yes. Well, we'll be there in the back. And so I wasn't too convinced about that part. But on the other hand, I realized that that was a good move. So I told him, sorry, you're too late. You come too late. My children are born. Too early. They're not brought up yet. So I said, you know, we could make a bargain. I could run on the hustings for 2 months. That would be good for my practice. You know, I would love it. But you will guarantee me that I lose. He said, Claire, we're going to put someone there. She'll be elected. We would put a dog, and he would be elected in that circumscription. I said, put the dog. But as is usually my practice, I said, you know, I know someone. She was my client, and I was doing her estate. Her husband had died. She was a member of the Auxiliary Council and everything. I said, she's beautiful. She knows the business a bit because she's been on the Auxiliary Council and everything. You should ask her. And they did. She was elected. She became the Speaker of the House, Albany Morin. So I always do that when I ask for those of you who would ask me to go and speak, I said, well, I can't, but I can suggest this one, whatever. So I think it's a good way to help people to get the best person that you think of. So that's how I was not a minister ever. I never became prime minister.
I know, and I was so fascinated that you didn't go into politics. And I've been tracking that, trying to decide, interviewing people to decide whether you made a mistake and should have gone into politics. Instead, whether you would have made a bigger impact. And so I have interviewed many people, including Monique Bezan, who was one of the women who ran in 1972 and was elected and went on to become an absolutely superb cabinet minister. And there was Jean Sauvé, who went on to become a cabinet minister and the Governor General of Canada, first woman in that position. But I've been interviewing people to say, do you think Claire would have made a great politician? And Stéphane Dayon, who knew Claire's family very well, said she would have been superb. She just rocks a room when she comes through. She can speak. She's funny. She's charismatic. She would have been so electable. She would have got on so well with her cabinet colleagues. And she was bilingual, which was unusual for many people coming out of Quebec at the time. So he said, oh, she would have been extraordinary. Monique Bezan was a little more cautious. She said, I have no doubt that she would have been an extraordinary politician. And she said, you would have become the first cabinet minister. Instead of Jean Sauvé, was her guess. But she said, I have one question for you. She said, am I correct that Madame le Juge does not suffer fools gladly?
She was correct.
And she said there just might have been a tiny problem getting on with some of her colleagues and some of the civil servants.
I would have shared it with Pierre, Elliott, Trudeau, by the way.
Yes, you would have. And when I interviewed, one of the great enjoyments of my life, I got to meet Marc Lalonde this summer. And I interviewed him and asked him how he thought you would have done. And he said, for sure you would have been a cabinet minister. And I repeated Monique Bezan's concern about suffering fools not gladly. And he said, well, she would have joined Pierre Elliott Trudeau in the same thing. But he also, it was so lovely. He said that they were so hungry for women in the Liberal Party in the early 1970s. And he credited his wife for having taught him everything he knew about the burgeoning feminism in the 1970s. But he said, we were so hungry for good women, we would have put 2 of them in as cabinet ministers, not a problem. So I have a regret that Claire didn't go into politics in 1972, but in the end, it was Alan Rock who convinced me, our president and a graduate of the University of Ottawa, that probably you made a greater contribution as a judge than you would have in politics, even if you had risen to be Minister of Justice, Minister of Health and Welfare, Minister of External Affairs. He thought, in fact, your tenure at the Supreme Court of Canada was so stunning that it was a greater contribution than in politics. So because
in politics, I would have been fired early.
My interviewees said you probably would have quit.
Most probably.
So this takes us to 1 year later, right after Pierre Elliott Trudeau is in Claire's home in Quebec City, 1973, and the first judicial appointment comes through to the Quebec Superior Court. So I wanted to ask how you recall being made a judge. How did that happen? And maybe you can describe for our students, they're a long way from that yet, but some of you in the room will also become judges down the road.
Well, to tell you the truth, I never thought about it. It was an impossibility. I describe it, all was black. Men on the bench with this black, and there was no women face. So it was not even a dream, not achievable, nothing. But one day I got a call from Albany Morin, who was a member of parliament, and she said, Claire, we need to put a woman on the bench, and we're thinking of you. I spoke to your colleagues from the practice, and particularly my colleagues at the university. Some of them were judges and so on. We have an opening. This is a judge retiring, and we absolutely want. I said, Albany, please please don't. I am making money for the first time in my life. Give me 5 years at least. She said, well, send me your CV. Oh, I don't mind sending me your CV, but I mentioned it to you, don't do it. So eventually, never heard about it anymore, was very happy with my practice. I had magnificent law partners. Sam Bard had been appointed to the Superior Court of Quebec at the time in 1969. I was the head of the firm. I had hired the most extraordinary lawyers to help me. I had another one. We had a superb law firm, one that we never had a word together. We never had a discussion. We love each other, we still do, and so on. So it was heaven on earth. So why would I want to go away from that? So that was another consideration. But anyway, I never heard a word from it until.
Several phone calls came in to please call Mr. Lang. And Claire apparently said to her secretary, who is this Mr. Lang? I have no idea who Mr. Lang is. I'm busy. Yeah. I'm busy. And so days go by. More phone calls. Please call Mr. Lang. And so eventually you returned the call.
Well, I took the phone. I was there, so I took the phone. And he said, Madame L'Heureux-Dubé, we have signed your appointment to the bench. Whoa! What do you do? I could have said no, but I didn't even think. I said, my God. So, I told Albany, you did it without my consent. But apparently they had a certain somehow, I don't know the story myself. I know I got the phone call, I answered the phone, and no, do you want to? Do you consent? No way, we've signed.
And how did you find being the first woman on the Superior Court in Quebec City?
Well, I mustn't say it was love at first time. I heard a little girl who was a daughter of one of my eventual colleagues. She was living around, and she said, Madame Dubé, there's a woman that's been appointed. They're not happy. Ils sont pas contents. So I said, why? And I didn't tell her it was me, but so she said, apparently she knows nothing. She just done family law and this and that. So I laughed and I said, oh, no, that's okay, no problem. I just registered. So when I was appointed, the Chief Justice was so mad, he didn't say a word about me, because when you're appointed, there's a big ceremony. You're supposed to give all your nice things and everything. He didn't say a word. He spoke about unions. So I got the same treatment at the Supreme Court, by the way. When I came here, it was new. But somehow I was a disturbing factor. Many of them didn't want, they were Catholics, divorce was terrible, and I was the divorced person. I had 10 women at the same day sometimes divorcing. The Chief Justice had said he would never grant a divorce. So that was part of the mix. But my personality was also in a great discouragement to them. One of them came, "You're happy today?" because he was my neighbor in Chambers, and I said, yes. He said, "You're a slave for the rest of your days." See, so I was, and I'm glad.
So if we can just pause for one moment here, I wanted to ask your opinion about the process used to select judges. And if you have any thoughts about ways that should play out. How should we in Canada select judges?
Well, I wrote about it in some law review, I think Alberta Law Review or something. At the time, there was discussion about the American way after Thomas was nominated. So we were thinking about those things. And my view, and it is still my view, it should be done in a very fair way. Having a commission of independent people named for 10 years, just like South Africa, or a bit like the model of South Africa, where the Chief Justice is part of it, and the bar, the local bar, the Canadian bar, members of the public who would interview people themselves. In South Africa, it's on the TV. Apparently, nobody looks at it, and in some countries like Israel, they go and reach for judges. You should be a judge. Come on, and they put them. So this is the way it should be. To the person that has the best qualification for it. For example, a judge of a court of appeal has to know how to write, because I remember my first meeting with judges of a court of appeal when I went. The name of the game, Claire, is writing. So you don't choose a judge of a court of appeal just like you choose. My view is that a judge should have made his classes as first instance, second instance before being nominated. Doesn't mean that ones come direct from the bar are no good. It means that they don't have the experience and expertise to deal with people. For example, to know the tricks of insurance companies when they want to expertise and not. We learned that. We learned the trade from practice, and we learned the trade from the first rank of judges. The first instance judge has a lot to contribute, and then, of course, the Court of Appeal, a different thing. So that's my view, basically. It should be fair. It should be responsible to the public, not be political or anything else, just the best person, whether it's a woman or a man, but give a woman a chance. Before we didn't have any. So I think that was my view then, and it's my view now, that it would be the best process of nomination.
So after a number of years on the Superior Court, you were appointed to the Quebec Court of Appeal in 1979 and to the Supreme Court of Canada in 1987. You were the first woman on the Quebec Court of Appeal and the second woman on the Supreme Court of Canada. Do you have any thoughts about how that came to be?
Well, I guess that I was appointed by the Liberal government at the time. Don't remember which was Otto Lang.
Otto Lang.
And then in the Court of Appeal, there was a Conservative who were there. That was the 6 days of Joe, the 6 months, I think, of Joe Clark. And I have no idea how, but one of my classmates at the time was Martial Asselin, who became Lieutenant Governor of Quebec, was a Senate member and everything. He was. So apparently, he told the Chief Justice at a meeting, at a lunch we had for him at the court at one point, something I didn't know. He said, I was on a plane going to Tanzania with Joe Clark and Maureen McTeer, and we were looking at nominations, and Maureen said, we have to put a woman in Quebec. And he said to him, he said, oh, I know one, she's good at it. So he attributes my nomination to him. And Maureen McTeer, apparently. So that's one story. I don't know the others. There are other stories. But and then I was asked to go for a week on the Court of Appeal. We do that, when you need a judge in the Court of Appeal, you take one from the first instance, and so I thought it was that. So they asked me to go in the Court of Appeal for 1 week to sit with the judges. But later on, I learned that I was on probation, so that they would see if... so the judges who sat with me told me that afterwards. Claire, you did a great job. We said that. But I didn't know I was on probation, so after that, they named me. I don't think they did it for men, by the way. I would be surprised they put men on probation, but I was. I was good.
And did you find sitting on the bench to be a fulfilling career path?
For me, first, I didn't think of it like that. I did the job. But for me, really, delivering justice is a passion, has been a passion for a long time, even in my law practice, when I was a first instance. So for me, the fulfillment, I don't know, but really a great opportunity for me to put injustice, my ideas, how women were badly treated, and when I was a lawyer, now I'll settle that. And how the poor were badly treated, I'll settle that. How the people handicapped, everything. So that was really a chance to expand on my basic principle of fairness for society and so on. So it was heaven, really. It was hard work, I must tell you. My daughter said I should not have taken the appointment because they were left at home and whatever. She's beautiful and she succeeds by her own. So, you know, there may be some truth to it. She always says, Mom, you can't have it all. Well, it depends. I would say it depends. And we have, Constance will decide eventually.
Well, it's interesting because most of the women in law in your generation did drop out when they were married or had children. It was my generation that said, no, we can have it all. And we said we will stay in our legal careers once we have children. So you were ahead of the curve. And in fact, I think that's a common theme throughout your entire life, is you're always ahead by a good big gap of the cohort of women who's coming after you. You said, I can have a family and I can practice law both, and I can be a judge at the same time. And so bravo to you for all the rest of us who came behind and who didn't really want to have to make a choice, one or the other. We wanted to combine them. So I personally think
we can, but you have to be very well organized. And I think it was, I'll tell you frankly, it was easier in my time than it is for you. Small city, 300 lawyers, very nice, no competition, savage competition that there is today. I could have a nanny who was living at home, was superb, not too expensive as they are today. I was living close to my office, 5 minutes. I could come home at lunch with my kids and be there at 4:30 when they came back from school, and then go back to the office around 9 o'clock when they were in bed and work until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning if need be. So I don't think that you have that opportunity today. Today demands, I didn't have to put hours. We didn't work that way. We worked on a file, what is worth, and we discussed with the client what would be fair and everything. So there was not that tension today. I'm sorry to say that, but I had it much better than you and my daughter, for example. So you'll have to be extremely well organized. Oh, you have things that I didn't have a BlackBerry, I didn't have that. And of course I didn't need it, but you have to have it, so.
I'm going to jump next into a couple of questions about your decisions, because I know our students are reading them and we'll be reading many more. And I'm going to ask just two general questions and leave you to answer them in the order that you wish. One, do you think there is a hierarchy of rights under the Charter? And two, you have been known as the dissenting judge. And I wondered where that comes from, what that means to you, and what the value of dissenting is to you.
Well, I'll start with the second question, which is easier, but perhaps you were not born a dissenter. You become a dissenter. And in my early life, I was a rebel, like my grandson just showed yesterday. He'll have that heredity, I think. I never took no for an answer. I always discussed and said, why, da. So my father, for example, was asked when I was appointed at the Supreme Court, she must have been hard to bring up. He said, no, not that much, but she always wanted to have the last word. Well, I was there to have the last word also at the Supreme Court. So it's a bit the way I am, just not accepting anything, and I want to know why, and I want to examine the context and so on. So interestingly enough, when I was at the Court of Appeal, I looked it up, and I was there for 8 years at the Court of Appeal, I think, and I dissented 8 times, once a year. Why? And the Dean of the Law Faculty, Civil Law, did write an article along those lines, but why? We speak the same language. We have the same religion. We have the same social context. We know our people and everything. So there's many less chances to dissent. I dissented on principle on one phrase that one colleague didn't want to get out of his, I said, okay, I'm going to write. I wrote 20 pages for one phrase that I thought was wrong. But in general, it was consensual, it was more. When you come to the Court of Appeal, you don't speak the same language, you don't have the same religion, you don't come from the same background, so it's quite normal that we have more dissents, because we are in that kind of environment where I was brought up in such a way, others were brought up, so we have different, perspective and everything. So I explained it that way in the Supreme Court. But also, being two women only at the time, we had a view of discrimination, for example, equality issues, that was quite different from, because of our own experience as women. So I think the dissent came more easily. For example, in cases of rape, in cases of women, and in cases of children, testimony, Mark Hurd, and all the others, and a question of 24-2 also. I had a different perspective, and usually it was 4-5 or something, much more than it is today. There are more women. For women, I think their voice is heard more easily, and there's a new generation there. So I think that my dissent was natural, but you don't dissent for dissenting. You dissent because you hold dear to a principle. You have to keep your credibility. Sometimes I could have dissented, but I said, well, they made so many efforts to accommodate my views that maybe it wouldn't be, I regret them mostly, but anyway. There is a time for compromise, and there is a time for standing up for your principles, and I think that's what I did. The second question, what was it again?
Hierarchy.
I'm 85.
Hierarchy.
So maybe, yes, and my voice is terrible, but I only have one, so I have to cope with it. One question, I still am quite in law, in the sense that I read everything, every decision of the Supreme Court, every decision of other courts that are of interest in something. So one thing that I wrote recently, Haran Barak wrote, the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Israel, whom is a good friend from way, way back. I was in Israel. I'm doing some work in Ramallah. We had a contract for 7 years to teach judges in Ramallah, our team, Chief Justice Fraser, Doug Campbell, and myself, mostly, and Reem Badi from Windsor Law School, to teach judges about human dignity there. It was an extraordinary experience. So we would come to Israel, and I met Aaron, gave me his last book about proportionality. You should all read this. It's very interesting. And in one of those reflections, he says, there is a hierarchy of rights. I always thought so, but the court said the contrary. The court said fundamental rights, there's no hierarchy. They said fundamental rights. They may be right there, but they didn't talk about liberties, freedom of expression, freedom of religion. They are not fundamental rights. They are fundamental liberties. It's a big difference. And I don't think that there has been any study on that already here. So I'm fascinated with this idea of treating liberties as freedoms, which are not what we see, not fundamental, but that you can't curtail the right to life, going against the freedom of expression, for example. Right to life, you can't avoid it. It's so fundamental. There's no way you could shrink that to something else. But for fundamental liberties, if we call them fundamental, it's a different category of rights. And nobody has really made the difference. So for the first time, I mentioned it publicly, but that's been going through my mind for a long time, and I would like to see that more developed in the literature, in the research, how we came up to mix up the two, and where are the difference and how they work out and everything. I have not written it yet. Maybe. You never know. I would like to leave you with one idea. You will be practicing, you'll be in any kind of business, journalism, whatever. But I think don't work for money, work for justice, work for your principles. I had Lauren Broughton, for example, last night at the Supreme Court, a little reception for my 85th birthday. And Lauren will lose probably her circumscription because she's the Minister of Education in Ontario. I said, Laurel, I admire you. You stick with your principles. You know you might lose, but stick with it. So whatever. I did. My dissents have almost all become law. 10 years, one of them 18 years ago. I wrote Market for children who were witnesses in court. The test I thought was too high because they were children of 3 years old who couldn't express themselves. So I said, no, the test too high. Today, that's the law. The government put it in law. O'Connor was put in legislation right away. So, I mean, it's not for that. But I stuck to what I thought was right. And today, I'm happy that those ideas are now the law in Canada. I hope everyone will be, but I'm not dead yet, so I might see it. But the major ones are. So stick with your principles. And, you know, if you don't work for money, you will work for justice, for a just society, a better world, human rights, and so on. You'll make money just the same. I did. So there's no challenge, there's no risk there. And the profession is not a business. It's a service to the public. And there's no access to justice right now. So work on the access to it. I did my best. I worked for the poor. I did pro bono work. I did everything I could. And it didn't make me poorer. And I feel so much better. I feel good because I've done something for the people. So I want to leave you with those ideas. Money is nice, but it's not everything. And you will have enough anyway. So think about that. I am here to work for justice. That's why I come to law school. I don't come to law school to go into a business where only you can go into business, but only for making money. Don't and you'll be so much happier. I'm 85 and I look happy, doesn't I? So